which is similar to like having a lower grade RCA jacks or lower grade connectors. Um, and let's see, we have more. And does the Jean Hiraga class A need it or not? I have no clue. Uh, I don't know anything at all on applications of solid state gear. What I know about them is how to tweak their power supplies, how to do those things that you would do to vacuum tube amps which work there, which means like the soldering points of wires, changing the wires, uh, uh, RFI, EMI, protecting those circuits, dampening, taking those aspects, fine-tuning those aspects which are almost never fine-tuned with solid-state gear. So when I approach solid-state gear, I allow the person who created it to bring that to the table, and then all of those accompaniments, which are like the connectors, the chassis, these things, uh, I am comfortable of upping them, and that in itself is already enough to bring on a drastical improvement in the sound. The second thing I did with solid state stuff is just upgrading the quality of the capacitors and resistors in it. And even if you are not changing the capacitors, number one thing that I recommend is to put EMI shielding around the capacitors and ground those shields. That's going to vastly improve solid state design. So I think solid state technology is as like viewing it as a violinist or as someone who who doesn't even think in the realms of studio sound or artificial sound, but in the sound of fidelity, which is like fidelity to live instruments. Solid state gear can step up a lot, and their main weakness is their sensitivity to noise and EMI and RFI. And I think 29, you asked about Jean Hiraga and specifically his design. I heard it being mentioned and heard people love it, but I never heard how it sounds. I don't know about its topology, what it does, how it does. Frank, he knows Monsieur Hiraga, and he could tell more about it. And I suspect that what he would tell you about Jean Hiraga's solid state designs is that he started making it not because that's was his favorite, but that's what people wanted him to make. So it's not something that he himself considered as something, the sound he wanted to share with the world, but is the sound that the world wanted from him. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, so let's. There's like tons of comments coming in. Red Eye, the pure darling amp. I'm a little confused on the two chokes in L1 and L2. I'm wanting to order them from Edcore. So eventually, don't worry about the exact kind of the choke. Why I'm not sure what the confusion is, but I think the confusion is that the basic darling, I have only one choke, and the pure darling, two chokes. And it will be the most efficient when the two chokes are the same choke, just two of them. Yes, Corey, actually, that's what I wanted to talk about today, is that I don't know if you guys know that Vangelis passed away this week. And I just learned it yesterday, and Jean-Michel Jarre posted it on his Facebook page that his dear friend Vangelis passed away, and then Nelly read it. I'm not big on Facebook, and uh, and it's just devastating. I was just really sad yesterday, and uh, and I think maybe I will take a little time talking about Vangelis. Because I think he was the biggest, to me, the greatest musical genius of the 20th century. And I've been listening to his music since I was a kid, and I have many of his records, and not just records, CDs, all kind of formats. And he was a special person because he really channeled music to us. He was not like most of the musicians who have like a musical training, learned how to do music in school. He just had a natural talent. He started playing piano on his own, and they sent him to school to learn like really the traditional way how we read sheet music and stuff like that. And he didn't really like it and didn't really get it, and he faked it. He faked reading a score, because once he heard the music once, he could play it back perfectly, and he just acted as if he's reading the score while he's playing, and he was just flipping pages. And of course the teachers sooner or later noticed that he's just like flipping it randomly. And but nevertheless, the big difference that that kind of approach made is that when you learn music through education, then you learn kind of like you learn classical music, you learn what are the traditional melodies we have, and you tend to think within the confines that you learn as rules, as musical rules. And he did not abide by any of these rules. He just really went out to recreate sound how he heard it in his mind. And you will notice that basically all of his albums are really different, almost as if a different person wrote that album. And the greatest thing about Vangelis was that he always made live music, and that means that he prepared uh, the uh, the music in advance, and when he recorded, then he recorded everything on a single take, and he played every instrument live. And it's pretty crazy because his songs are really complex, uh, and it's just incredible that he is just capable of doing that, while most musicians in our era, they might like take something like 100 times, and then they splice it up, and there's an engineer adjusting everything, and it just takes like ages to come up. And with Vangelis, he just gave, basically we are getting live music from his recordings. It's phenomenal. So is there any way we can join you on video? On the video, I think YouTube doesn't allow it. I haven't seen any options on a live chat. It's possible on other apps, maybe. Do I have the capacity to learn that and deal with that? I don't think so. Maybe later on, but for now, I think sadly this is what we have for now. And oh, so Red, I asked how many Henry should the chokes be, and what do you need? So I think the more Henrys you have, the quieter that supply will be. And if you use at least 2 Henrys for each of the chokes, you will be fine. But I would say like 4 Henrys. In my darling, I have 4 Henry chokes, a pair of them, and that's already like as quiet as that. With ultra efficiency speakers, it doesn't make a difference whether you turn the amp on or the amp is off. There's absolutely no background noise heard from the supply. And you could go even higher than 4 Henrys, but if we go really high on the Henrys, then that will after a while come up as a decrease in dynamics, so it will start to hold the music back. um, so I would say, like, don't worry about the exact inductance. Try to get the lowest DC resistance for the chokes, and something that just has a reasonable size, because if it's like higher Henry, like 4 Henry super low DCR, it can get pretty big and very expensive. And Henrys aren't as important as DCR. I tried several in the 45 amp. High DCR, less dynamics, using 3 Henrys now. That's what Corey said, and I totally second his experience. Low DCR gives you higher dynamics and faster bass response, and not just bass response, but the sound will be more immediate. If the choke is high DCR, it means that the power supply takes longer time to reload. Do you have any designs for 6R6 tubes? I didn't make any myself for 6R6. My favorite is the 807, which is actually a variant of 6R6. You need to bias it a little differently than 6R6 because the screen has to be taken care of in a little bit different manner than with 6R6. But apart from that, with minor modifications, they are more or less interchangeable. And I have to say that the 6R6 family of tubes is my favorite family of power tubes. And why? There are several reasons. Number one, why I started with them is because they are more affordable than using single-ended triodes. I mean, true triodes like 45, 2A3, 300B. They can get much more expensive, and you also need direct, I mean, DC filaments for them if you want a really quiet amplifier. And the other reason is that when they sound absolutely fabulous. So when I think about power tube sound characteristic, what is their character? The true triodes have very strong characters to them. So when usually when you hear a 300B amp, you really get the 300B sound hitting you, that its character, that it's really all about the mid-range, and it has that magical quality to it. And then of course you hear like a bunch of amps, all of them sound different based on what the driver tube is that drives the 300B and every other parameters. But the character of 300B always stays, and it's quite recognizable. And if you listen to a 45, 45s always have their character. It gives you a more like a somber, holographic, very objective sound, and it's like you are at sitting watching a concert. It's really fantastic. And the 6R6 family, when you use them in single-ended mode, it sounds very much similar to these tubes like 45, 2A3, 300B. I think it sounds closest to the 2A3, but with less character. And it's I've been playing around with the 807 for almost 20 years now. Hey, thank you. And what my original expectation was with the 6R6 family is that I'm going to play around with it because that's the only thing I could afford in the past. And then when I have enough money, then I will switch over to 300B or 2A3 or some other true triode, and not just using a pentode in a triode mode, or even in a pentode mode. And then I made realizations while playing around with the 807, with the 6R6 family, that they have much greater potential in them that people suspect. And the big difference between push-pull amplifiers and push-pull pentodes that we generally commercially have and single-ended no feedback triodes is not the difference that one uses a direct heated triode tube and the other uses indirect heated pentode as power tube, but it's the topology. The topology gives the key difference. And talking about ER34, that's where I made this discovery first. So I had a Dynaco Stereo 70. That was the first amp that I started learning DIY amplifier builder skills with. The first thing that my mentor recommended to me is to install a triode switch. That was too sad. that just put in a triode switch. And so I could switch between ultralinear operation and triode operation. And when I switched it to triode operation, it sounded much more like a triode amplifier, and I was just shocked. Like, how can the sound change so much with the same tube? And after that, I started playing around with the Darling amplifier, which is a true triode, and I thought that it had some limitations. And the limitations were not to the sound, but my main limitation was with the line AC. So when the line AC was perfect, it was heaven. It was to me at least as level of experience as a top level audio note system. That was my reference to compare against, like an audio note level 5 with Ongaku all the way up to the top model stuff. And that what sort of connection that allowed music, the Darling amp with my void pipe and the system I built with all silver cabling, everything hot rodded, including power cord silver, and power cords hardwired, RCA jacks taken out, hardwired, and when line AC was perfect, it sounded absolutely fabulous, perfect, and even though it was like 1.5 watts per channel, I never felt any limitation about power. And it could even recreate a full-scale classical orchestra at a credible level in my living room. And however, when the line AC was not perfect, then it sounded kind of like a mediocre system. And the times when line AC was bad, it sounded absolutely horrific. I couldn't deal with it. And I thought that the limitation for that is the amplifier, is the system. And later on, I had to learn that I was very wrong about it. The real limitation was the line AC. And I started to fiddle around, fixing the line AC, doing all sorts of power conditioning things, filtering. And what I noticed that if anything you put in your line AC, it will prevent the worst case scenarios from happening. So it will stabilize your power quality that gets to your system, but it will also cripple it. It will keep it at a level. So basically, instead of having like a nightmare situation and heaven, if you put any kind of constant power conditioning on your system, depending on the power conditioner, it will squeeze it into a narrower range. If it's a poor power conditioner, it will just do this, like take away the heavenly region completely. You are never ever in your life going to hear that, maybe like 40%, and it's going to take away the very worst case scenario, but you still have this kind of leeway. And if it's a better power conditioner, then this zone migrates higher. So you get better and better worst case scenarios, but the best, you are never going to get that transcendent level of playback that a perfect line AC allows. Okay, ultralinear is already a marketing term that implies that something gets magically linear. In reality, it is negative feedback that distorts the incoming signal. Thank you, Snake Audio. That's so true. That I think that's my experience as well. That negative feedback has tremendous destructive effect on the power. And when I put the triode switch into my Dynaco Stereo 70, when I switched from the ultralinear mode uh, to triode mode, it wasn't just connecting the tube in a different way. It wasn't just using it as a triode instead of a special pentode with a swinging screen, but it was also decreasing the negative feedback quite a bit. And that's because in triode mode, all tubes, all pentodes have lower gain than in pentode mode. And when you have lower gain, in the same feedback loop, you are going to have lower negative feedback as well. So what I was hearing in the stereo, in the Dynaco Stereo 70 with the triode switch is two things. One, going from pentode mode, ultralinear mode, which is kind of almost pentode, to triode mode, and also going from high negative feedback to lower negative feedback. And then with the Darling amplifier, I use zero feedback, and 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 uh, and that was the real eye opener, because with the what feedback does is that it destroys the fine harmonics, and it destroys the finest layer of music. So if you have negative feedback in the sound, then you are never going to experience the highest level of sound reproduction. And and I'm not talking about like what's best or something, but how it affects you. The emotional quality of a system, of a sound, manifests when you can reach that level. That when there is no feedback in the sound, that's destroying those fine spatial cues, because those fine phasing information gives us the spatiality, and then the spatiality gives us the realism of the of what we are hearing. And I think it when we apply negative feedback, it destroys more things than it fixes. However, it does one very important thing. It makes it allows us to create cheaper amplifiers, and it allows them to mate them to more compact loudspeakers. So it has practical implications that allowed the mass production of stereo at much lower prices. But when you want to expand to higher experience of the sound, then I really recommend for everyone is to try lowering the feedback, provided you have the loudspeaker that can take advantage of that. Because when the loudspeaker requires high current to drive, it has low impedance, then those speakers generally can use the negative feedback to keep them under control. And uh, Bob says, I found similar results when I wired my old Marantz 5S in triode mode as prescribed by Sid Smith. I wish I had kept them. That's so amazing. And it happens to us so many times that we have an amplifier or modify something, and then we try something else, and then we really wish we had what we had before. And that happens with me many times with my original Darling amplifier, because I kept on modifying it. So right now my KT66 single ended, that was my original Darling amp. However, the good thing is that when I built it, we built it with my buddies, and we built three of them. Charlie built one, and Tamás built one. We built the exact replicas of. So basically, we built three copies of the Darling amp, but all of us use different kind of wiring, different kind of skills to put it together, but the parts were the exact same. So we chose the parts together with and I have the other two. One in stock condition. I modified one for being DC coupled using original driver, much bigger transformer, and lots of I really pimped that out. That's in my upstairs singing. And the third one I kept on changing to the 806 tube, and now it's KT66. I'm going to change it back to 806, I mean 807, not 806. um, I sent you my new MTM speakers with walnut veneer. It's expensive here as it doesn't grow here. um, yeah, so uh, wood for loudspeakers, that's a tough question, and it's getting tougher every day because now there's like a shortage in wood supply, and it's not getting any better, it's getting worse and worse. So right now, if I wanted to build loudspeakers, I am really hard pressed to find any material at any price, because it's just like here in Hawaii, getting good quality material now, it's a major challenge. 2 years ago, it was a non-issue. Uh, Carlos said, I have a single Altec 604E coax speaker that I just got. What cabinet do you recommend for a mono setup? Actually, I would recommend a cabinet similar to the wall design, to what I built with my Altec speakers, and that would perfectly suit the 604 as well, and that would give them the ability to sing in a really wide range, and I think this type of cabinetry gives the the most advantages of the Altec technology, and also it has practicality as well because it's not extra large. Because the 604, it likes a big cabinet, and I don't recommend putting in a very small one, because you are going to the sound is going to shrink a lot. For example, but it's going to retain a lot of qualities. I heard 604E in open baffle, and it was like a really narrow open baffle, and it had like that super eerie transparent and ultra speed quality to it, but um, no bass whatsoever. Uh, let's see. Have you heard Flugelhorn in any of its versions? No, no, I have not heard the Flugelhorn. Um, let's see. Let's see. What else? Do you use any special joints while using normal wood that expands and contracts? My advice for wood is to use wood that's dried. So take time to dry out the wood before you build loudspeakers from them, so that it's aged and it doesn't have high moisture content with it, because that's going to give you the problem with wooden cabinets. If you have some real fresh wood and build a cabinet, and then it starts warping and tension forming in it as it dries, you have to dry it out first, and then you can build a cabinet. And for joints, what I'm doing for the internal frame for the wall, I use the crack jig set, and I did not use any special joint technologies. Now would I use? Probably I would, because now I have two routers plus a hand. Actually, I have three routers now, and I'm getting familiar with it. But until now, I was not familiar with routering. I haven't had a workstation to use router, so it was more of a technical limitation. But now I have a nice woodwork shop set up, so now I can do that. But it's not necessary to have any kind of special joining techniques to create like an internal frame, and then to put like a plywood sheets or full sheets on around for the baffles. What else? Yes, aging the wood. That's the most important. I'm glad you are doing that. Um, oh, Oh, you have a lot of spruce. Perfect. That's fantastic. And then I would recommend just build the cabinets from spruce, and that's the best. That's the best. So many music instruments they use spruce in their making, like piano, even guitars, violins, all kind. So and then they use spruce because spruce has the widest resonance transfer capability. So when you look at wood and when you knock them, you hear them. There's a different tone coming from each wood, and that's because they have a different capacity to transmit energy at certain frequencies. And spruce is the best that can give you the widest bandwidth frequency transfer, and that's why they use it for example, in the piano, which is most likely the widest frequency range normal instrument that we have. Of course, the church organ is a wider frequency range than the piano, but it takes an entire cathedral to house it. So I'm not talking about instruments that require a cathedral to house them, but like a single instrument, which is like a piano. And the piano sounds the way it does because it has the spruce soundboard in it, and that's able to amplify the resonances from the highest highs to the lowest lows. And that's why I recommend everyone to work with spruce, and it's going to give you the best sound for a cabinet because the resonances it transmits the energy of the driver, the energy of the sound pressure inside the cabinet as they happen. Because when here's our cabinet, and there's the driver, and when the driver cone is moving back and forth, it's creating on the inside the same sound that it creates in the room. And what happens is that if the cabinet is capable to transmit that energy to the air, then on the inside you are not going to have a big mess. But if that cabinet material is unable to transmit to the air at certain frequencies, then those frequencies are going to be bouncing back and forth inside the cabinet, and because they are unable to transfer the energy to the air at those frequencies, they are going to excite the resonant modes, the main resonant modes of the cabinet, and that's what we will hear as loudspeaker cabinet sound. So basically, when you have a box, and if it's not a big box made of spruce, it's going to have a very strong character on its own because it's going to have those resonance modes excited all the time uh, when it has frequencies reaching it that it cannot transmit. And for example, MDF is really bad. It has very limited capacity to transmit energy from the MDF, the wood itself, to the air of the room, and it can do it at a narrow frequencies, and it takes it a lot of time for the energy to transfer and move out. And that's why I don't like MDF cabinets, because they just add their own strong coloration to the sound, which is very different from the actual music that's playing for you. Let's see. My full room is spruce and activated charcoal. So what 29 says here about his room is spruce is that what you have in your room, that material also adds its capacities, because if it's a different material, it will reflect different frequencies with different preferences. So, for example, if you have a lot of glass in your room, it's going to reflect back a lot of high energy to you, and it's going to not reflect back lower frequency sound. So it's going to really skew the sound to a really glassy, really sharp, unpleasant sound. If you have stone, the stone is going to give you like really hard reflections, and it's going to be echoey and truly bad. But if you have a lot of spruce, a lot of wood around in your home, then when the sound hits it, it's going to store that resonance a little bit and then give it back. And what it does, it's almost like delaying the resonances. So it's not like coming from a hardwood right away bouncing back at you, but it hits the spruce, and then the spruce takes time to reflect the energy back. So basically your room will expand. Your ears will perceive it as if you have the bigger room made with more natural material, made a wooden material, not some man-made stuff. Uh, and so I think now you would say like, what's more natural material? Like stone is natural. If I have a stone house, that's natural. What are you talking about? Is that when we are anywhere, and let's say you are out in the woods and singing, it sounds great because they're in the forest, right? But if you are in a cave singing, now you have the stone around you. That sounds pretty rough. Um, Uh, so audio is a dirty business. Google and many famous will say things to sell more parts. Mm, I think everyone is trying to make a living, and some are more fair than others. Some are doing their best, and for example, and others are just they have good ideas, but they want to make a shit ton of money on it. And Dualund is one thing that comes into my mind. They have great ideas, but they are making a killing on it. So they are using the Polish Miflex company as an OEM manufacturer, and Miflex already has phenomenal capacitors. They have basically the same copper cast capacitors that are manufactured, I mean, are sold under the Dualund name. And Dualund is just using their tooling, their technology, and selling the same stuff at 16 times the price, which is just, I can't think of any kind of justification to just do that kind of ripoff. It's like, oh guys, it's my mentors too. If he would be alive today, he would be like extra horrified, uh, because this and that's what gives rise to the legend of the boutique parts, because boutique to me is when you pay much more than what the stuff is worth for. So there's a lot of things that's worth the money you are paying for. If you are getting the Miflex, uh, I think it's just an astonishing value. And I second Corey's comment. They are absolutely fabulous, first-rate capacitors, the Miflex KPCU capacitors, and they are selling at a reasonable price, and I think it's a surprisingly low price for the level of technology required to manufacture it. What else? Let's see. Why are grid stopper resistors used on your Darling amp? That was Corey's question. And they are used because my older audio brother, Kyle, he was the one who coached us on how to build our Darling amps. So basically, we used Jeremy Epstein's double DC Darling as the basis for our Darling amp, with Kyle Kuroda's power supply with it. And he said that those grid stoppers are really important. And why is that? What does a grid stopper do? So the grid stopper, it basically blocks very high frequencies, like megahertz level frequencies, from getting into the tube. And that's something that the people don't realize, but it's really destructive if megahertz level frequencies get into an amplifier, because that's going to rob your amplifier from a lot of power, and will also add an instability to the sound. And although we cannot hear 1 megahertz, but it's going to interact with the audio frequency signals, and it's going to just mess up the edges of the like around like 15-20 kilohertz, and the fine phase differences between those sounds. It will be very, very noticeable. And also another reason why don't we see the grid stoppers in every tube amplifier? And that's partially because there's a lot of tubes that were not designed to be wide frequency band vacuum tubes. And in the Darling amp, the tubes we are using, both the 6J4 and the 1626, they are really happy to work in the several megahertz range. I think the maybe like 5 megahertz at least, or 50 megahertz. So just ridiculously, they have an astonishingly wide bandwidth where they are linear and where they operate, and we need the grid stopper to prevent those tubes from picking up those megahertz noises that come from your interconnect cable. Because even if that noise is not present on the signal on your digital source or vinyl that you are coming, but the length of the interconnect, it acts as an antenna, and it picks up RF. And we have like radio stations around 100 megahertz. The 6J4 is going to pick that up, and we need the grid stopper to prevent your radio station from or all kinds of walkie-talkies or whatnot that people use in those frequencies to mess with the sound. And with the Darling amp, because it's so low power, we are listening to either lower volumes, or we use ultra efficiency speakers. So whatever the mass your interconnect injects to the sound, you are going to hear more of it. Let's see. Obligato, Mundorf, yes, they are great. They make lots of excellent capacitors. Obligato, they make like, I would say, like, if you are building stuff and you are really strapped on a budget, go for obligatos, and don't go for anything cheaper, because it's going to really hamstring the equipment. And under cheaper, I mean under something of a lower quality than that. And Mundorf has lots of different levels, and they can get super duper expensive. And they have like the Mundorf Evo Oil series, which is at a pretty good price and affordable. But then they have like the Supreme silver gold. Those are like ridiculously expensive, and I think in those cases I would rather recommend the Miflex capacitors, which are more affordable but still excellent sounding. Obligato versus Miflex, what do I think of the difference? Obligato is kind of like a little Miflex. It's like a more limited version of Miflex, and but they have the same tone, same character, so you can mix and match them. So if you have Obligato, you can use, maybe if you want like a 20 microfarad cap, it's like usually just unobtainable. If you want to think about Miflex, it's super expensive. Just get like a 20 microfarad Obligato and bypass it with a 0.22 microfarad Miflex, and they will be nice and happy to sing along. Yeah, so yeah, next cap, for if you want bigger value, they go over $200-300. So that's how we can kind of get that level of sound by mixing, like getting a 20 microfarad Obligato, which is like 10 times cheaper than that price, and just bypass it with a small Miflex. And Corey is asking, would I recommend bypassing a large value cathode bypass cap with a small value high quality film, or would this add phasing issues? It really depends. It depends on the capacitors we are using. If you can do it, one of my recommendation is just to use like a 20 microfarad high quality film capacitor for bypass, and or like what I'm using in my single-ended triode amp. I'm using a DC link capacitor. That's a film capacitor, and I use 40 microfarad, two 20 microfarad DC link caps, and that's on the cathode bypass for the power tubes, and actually when you bypass the DC link capacitor, the Panasonic DC link cap with a Miflex, then it will sound as if it's a high value Miflex capacitor. So that in that case, like you have DC link film caps bypassed by a small Miflex, then it will be, I'm using that, so that will give you the highest quality. If you want to use electrolytics, then I use the Elna Silmic 2s. They have a sound that allows to retain the uh, naturalness of complex tone instruments. So that gives like a more credible orchestra sound, or cello, violin, tabla, sitar, sharod. And I have not yet have not done extensive bypassing on it. What I'm bypassing on it is like a small value oil capacitor. There are those smaller Russian caps, like paper in oil caps, and I'm using that in the single-handed amp, but I have not experimented there. If I would change that for a Miflex, it would be like stepping up, an upgrade, but I haven't tried that yet. Let's see. So DC link, I really highly recommend using it. It seems that like the audiophile community have not caught up on that. There's almost nobody using that technology. So but the good thing with it is that it's like very affordable, and it's also very lasting. So one big problem with capacitors is that you need to change the capacitors because they just tire out over time. It's kind of like the oil filter for the car. You have to keep changing on them. If it's an electrolytic capacitor, it really needs a frequent change. They don't last. If it's a film capacitor, it lasts much longer, but eventually after 10 years or 20, you still want to change that as well. But DC link capacitors, they are also film capacitors, but it's a very new technology. And and DC links are rated for like under the condition we are using it in audio, it's like million plus hours of operation. So even if you are using it day and night, it will last you like 100 year plus. And and what they have really special with them is they can easily take 100% over voltage. So if you have a 500 volts rated DC link cap, it can take a kilovolt for 30 seconds without any consequence. That's just absolutely crazy. But the good thing about the film caps, why I am using them for audio, is because they sound good. In the beginning, during the break-in phase, they do have a strong plastic taste to them. The music will start to turn plastic, and it's a very unpleasant flavor. But after break-in, that unpleasant flavor totally goes away. And when I was swapping that, I was swapping it with the Mundorf Evo oil. There's almost zero difference between how a fully broken in Mundorf Evo oil sounds and a fully broken in Panasonic DC link cap sound. You get the exact same thing. And the only difference is that you can get the DC link much cheaper. And the tough thing about it is that the prices like fluctuate based on the supply and demand. So when you go and order them from Mauser or DigiKey, these are the two sources I get them. I always do a search for what they have, because if you are looking for a very specific capacitance at very specific voltage rating, you are going to get really wild price fluctuations. I just periodically look at these companies like every month or so. I just do a search, DC and capacitor, and if they have values that I can use at super low price, I buy a bunch of them, and then there you go. So that's like a great strategy for capacitors for tweaking. And Corey says, I have 15-year-old 100 microfarad black gate electrolytic cathode bypass caps. Just wondering if bypassing these would be an upgrade or detriment. I think I tried DC links instead. Yes, so the 100 microfarad range, you can get DC link capacitors. One bad thing with DC link caps is they're huge. They're really, really big. So we can only do that change if you have enough space in your equipment, and also I'm using electrolytic caps for bypass only when there's no space. And Blackgate is now not available. AudioNote has the Kaisei caps now, and I had feedback from Lou that they are really great capacitors. We can use them. I I have not gotten around to try them yet. And fortunately I have enough space now in my amp to go for the film caps. And then the film cap will be always an upgrade, because they are faster than any electrolytics. Uh, and Yeah, so Corey is so right. Like, last thing I want to do is bypass them, wait for months to break in only to have it sound worse. Yeah, that's a nightmare scenario. And uh, yeah, so I'm not sure what bypass the black gates would like, because one thing with bypassing is that you need to bypass something that has a complementary uh, tonality with the cap that you are bypassing, and that depends not just on the capacitor itself, but also how it matches your system. So something that might be like a general improvement in some quality, it might be in specific cases bring on some changes which might be not very big, but might bother you on the long run. And even though you had like a lot of improvements, but those nagging qualities, they were not there before, and now you hear them and it's like, what's going on? But actually, what I noticed in many cases, if the bypassing strategy is good and you are bypassing high quality caps with even higher quality caps, and they match, and you have something strange creeping up, then you are finding out that something else in the audio chain, now you are revealing that, okay, there's a nasty that was hidden until now, and now I can hear it. And then we have to go and start troubleshooting what is causing that we can hear now. And this is the same thing that happens when we get like a higher quality amplifier or higher quality loudspeaker or interconnects in the system, that we are hearing improvements, but also we are starting to hear more issues coming up that need hunting down and fixing. And that's what makes audio such a maddening thing, that there's no free lunch, or no final tweak that I do and then it's done, because there's always something coming up that if I wish I could have gotten rid of that, then it would be perfect. And actually, when we are doing this and just refining and fine tuning step by step, there will come a time when you feel like, okay, now I don't even want to touch it, because I just want to listen to music. And to me, this has happened many years ago, and I honestly, I don't know why am I keeping on doing changes to the system, because it's just so frustrating not to listen to it, because while you are tweaking it, you can't listen to music. So that's why in the past 2 years I've barely done any mods on my system, and I only do mods like, for example, if I'm using the Ampex amplifiers, then I mod the single-ended triode, so I don't have to bring it offline. And what Snake Oil Audio shared that a friend of mine always says, don't use a €100 capacitor on a €20 tweeter, and he's absolutely right. And that's really vital, that when we go on about uh, improving our system, then you have to make sure that your main course is properly cooked before you are starting to worry about the salad and or the salad dressing. Because like in this case, the tweeter is your main course, and the capacitor feeding the tweeter is like the salad that goes with the main course. So if you have a really poor main course with an excellent salad dressing, it will just taste weird. Like, why am I getting like an haute cuisine salad with a fast food hamburger? It's just, what's going on? It's just like so disappointing. So you need, when we do go on about refining our audio system, make sure that we start with the basics, have the main parts right, which are like the transducers in our speakers. We have right sources that read out the music and transmit the music. We have high quality transformers where transformers are used, and when all of these are properly done, then we can improve the salad dressing around them, start to feed them with higher and higher level of opportunity or operation. Because what a capacitor does is it lets you hear what you have. And the poor quality capacitor, what it does not let all the information through. It stores some of it, it alters it, it adds its own resonances, its own transfer ability, transfer capacities to it, and a lot of things remain hidden. So the way to make a bad tweeter sound good is to add a bad capacitor to it, which does not let you hear all the nasty things, and it will modify, it will change its behavior to be a more pleasant or more seemingly controlled experience, but it's going to alter the information that's coming from your music source tremendously. Going to leave out a lot of details, it's going to alter a lot of aspects of the sound. And interstage transformers versus capacitors, pros and cons of both. Okay, so interstage capacitor, big con is big size, big price. But now we can say, hey, capacitors, same thing. Capacitors cost an arm and a leg too. But in most cases now, like you can get like for $15-20 a nice high enough quality capacitor. But to have a nice interstage transformer, maybe you need like $100 plus that huge space. So if you are designing an amplifiers from scratch and you have the space for it in your chassis, you can include it, then the interstage can take you much further than a capacitor can take you. But if you have an amplifier and you are modifying it, you probably don't have enough space for an interstage transformer. And if you want to cram it somewhere, it's probably going to be at a place where it's going to pick up some interactions from your power transformer, your output transformer, and if it's not the placement, the layout is not done properly, it's going to create more headaches than not. I think that's kind of the meat for it. and we could go into much more details, but this is, I think, the most important. So if you are doing something from scratch, then interstage is a more worthy choice, but you have to make sure that it has to be a very high quality interstage transformer. If it's a lower grade interstage transformer, it's going to add just as much or even more colorations of its own than a comparable capacitor. Um, in any case, an interstage is going to give you greater power handling capacity probably than most capacitors can, and that's because you can get a much more optimal driving power for the following stage compared to a capacitor. You will be able to swing the grid into positive voltages, which the capacitor cannot do. So when you are pushing the volume up, or you just even need like high energy transients, the interstage transformer is able to supply those high energy transients to the next stage, and the coupling capacitor, once you hit 0 volt, you hit the peak, then it's going to clip, and it's going to store the energy in itself and then release it later. It's going to create problems because it cannot release that extra peak because it cannot swing the other way around, and that's going to make, so that's what makes a lot of amplifiers sound harsh and cause much of the perceived distortion, especially in high frequencies. And that's what we experience as the amp running out of juice when we are reaching the limitation of the capacitor. When we have an interstage transformer, then it's able to give these transients, it's able to drive the power tube, or the next stage, maybe the driver section, into a positive grid voltage. So we are, instead of hitting this harsh distortion, we are getting extra headroom and extra power instead. So that's like a tremendous pro for the interstage transformer. And also, it's not just that it can drive the grid to positive voltages, but when the grid is going not just positive, when it's nearing 0 volts, it starts to draw current on its own. And when we have the traditional RC coupling, then we have a capacitor, and then a resistor going to ground, and the amount of current your grid can draw is limited by that resistor, and it will be always in the like 100 kilo ohm. That's like a typical grid resistor, and that 100k will limit the current that the grid can draw, and it will be just very meager. And when you have an interstage transformer, it just has a few kilo ohms DCR, or not even a kilo ohm, even less, just a few hundred ohms. So basically, talking about a high quality interstage transformer, it's like 100 ohm versus 100 kilo ohm. So basically, your tube can draw 1000 times as much grid current with the IT interstage transformer compared to the capacitor resistor coupling method. And there are some tubes which absolutely demand that high current for their grids. For example, the 8417 tube, that's a pentode that Quicksilver used, or the 6550 like KT88, the KT tubes, they love drawing grid current when you really want them to crank out high power. So that's why those amps, when you see 6550 amps, then you see that grid resistor there, the grid leak resistor, not the grid stopper resistor, grid leak. That's like 50k or 47k. They drop it even that low because the tube wants to draw that much grid current. And when KT88 amplifiers fail, then you usually see that that resistor there is not 47K, but it's like 100K, or some people even put like 200K. You see this a lot in Chinese amps. And that's because the bigger the value of that resistor, the lower frequencies can be supplied to the power tube. So you are basically improving the low end response. But you are also starving the tube and killing it if you listen to loud music or high energy transients. And this is not happening with an interstage transformer. It allows the power to draw as much current as you want. So I would say that for like KT80 type amps, if you want to build one, there an interstage will be a massive improvement over capacitors. But if you are using other power tubes which do not require as much grid current, then you will be fine with cap coupling. So for example, with the Darling amplifier, the 1626 tube, it draws very little to nothing grid current, and there uh, in most cases you will be fine with a coupling cap. But also because the IT allows to swing a lot more extra power, you can with even like almost double the power output of your amplifier, because that extra swing gives you that much extra headroom. And if you have like less than 1 watt output power, then doubling it is like quite a bit of extra headroom. Let's see. This is like going to audio college. I love it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Red Eye. And I'm glad to share what I have learned and experienced. And I really just have one wish that you can also uh, learn and try these things out and just go further than I have. And that's kind of like the all the yardstick for teachers, that if the student can surpass you, then you were a good teacher. And if you stay better than all your students and you are just like a guru in the sky, you are an abysmal teacher because you have taught nothing. So that's not my goal. uh-huh. Grid choke. Oh, Rick mentioned that grid choke, and that's what a grid choke does. That it simulates the effect of an interstage transformer. So one thing that you can do is, maybe if you do not have a space for an interstage transformer in your chassis, but you have space for a smaller grid choke, then instead of that resistor, you put a choke there. And what it does, that it has a low DCR, a low resistance, similar to the DCR of the secondary of the input state interstage transformer. And the grid choke allows the tube to draw that grid current, just like an interstage transformer allows. So in that case, when you combine the capacitor with the grid choke instead of a resistor, it will go halfway to becoming an interstage transformer, because it allows the power tube to draw the grid current, and it will avoid the power tube to reach that harsh distortion while the signal strength is getting higher. So for the transients, the transients will be much more cleaner when you have a grid choke versus just a resistor coupling. And of course, when you have grid choke and input capacitor, then it will not allow you to swing the tube into positive grid voltages, so you won't have that advantage, but it will allow you to have clean driving power for the entire range that the capacitor is able to supply. And of course, the other thing, that if you have an interstage transformer, then you don't need an extra grid choke, because the secondary of the interstage already performs the duty of the grid choke. And there's one thing with the interstage, that if you have a really beefy power transformer that draws tons of grid current, so let's just think about the 100th tube. It always draws grid current, and it draws super high, like 20 milliamps grid current or even higher. In so in these cases, so the primary of the interstage sits on the plate of the driver tube, and the secondary of the interstage is driving the grid of your power tube. And now when the current is increasing in one, that is limiting the magnetic capacity of the transformer. And if the current increases in both of them, so now the power tube is drawing grid current, so that's going to shrink the ability of the interstage transformer to transmit high level low frequency information to the power tube. And the fix for that is to flip the polarity on the secondary of the interstage transformer. So when the current increases on the primary section, then the current also increases on the secondary, but it flows the other direction. So when the directions of the current are opposite, they cancel out each other and allow you high magnetic headroom. And that's what a lot of designers use, like Sakuma-san. He uses this, and I think what else? I think maybe Shindo and others, they use this. And when you see that the secondary of the interstage is flipped, that's why they flip it, because it will make your interstage basically, it's kind of similar as if you have like maybe like a 5-watt interstage transformer, 5-watt rated, and instead it's as if you had maybe like a 25 or 50-watt rated interstage transformer, because it's not going to give you magnetic limitations. Let's see. How are we on time? Because I think it's already 9:24, so it's probably time for me to wrap up. Let's see. Is there a last request you would like to hear about? I hope I have covered all of the questions. Let's see. Yeah, so I think we have covered a lot of things today, and thank you guys for being here. Thank you for the suggestions of what other formats we could try out. Hopefully, one day I will have more time to think about these things, and then we can make this more interactive. And have everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Red Eye 29, Corey, and Snake Oil Audio, and Hyperborean, and to be that you were here and you joined and you asked fantastic questions. And PP Spinopoulos, thank you for being here. I'm tempted to make some live buffers, but I need more information. Yes, I can help you. Just ask away. I will make more videos on live buffers, how to make them, how to choose the sizes, how to choose materials. Carlos, thank you for asking about the Altec. And Bob, thank you for commenting on the Marantz with the triode mode. And so thank you guys. Have a wonderful day. I'm logging out if I can find. There's no logout button. Yay. Okay, I found it. Bye bye.